At this point, with the amount of videos I've made involving Loud House vs. Casagrandes, keep in mind, they're ones that are gonna be mostly oddly put together, even though it's somewhat established in previous videos that I've somewhat did that. But when it comes to this video involving these two episodes, it's going to be difficult to understand, but I am going to try my best to elaborate onto why that these episodes are similar to each other. A stellar performance and Born to be Mild are mainly the characters, mainly Stella and Alexis, trying everything to stand up for themselves, to overcome their fears. The only difference is that Stella isn't dealing with bullies and Alexis isn't dealing with a speech presentation. But considering that there was another episode that he was part of a band in front of an audience, it really shows that he doesn't have stage fright, he's just dealing with bullies. With suggestions that I received from DeviantArt by anonymous users, this isn't one of them, mainly the fact that people will not understand the comparisons and the major differences between two episodes. But for me personally, whenever I look at these episodes, I immediately think that one of the characters who are mostly minor, mainly Stella and Alexis in this show and in the Casagrandes, I honestly felt like that these two characters have something in common is mainly the fact that they can't be able to do anything that they're really afraid of doing, all the while that they get some guidance from their friends. And the major difference with that is that Stella is getting guidance from Lincoln and his freckle friends, whilst Alexis is getting guidance from Carl out of all people. And considering that that's literally the only character that Alexis is somewhat associated with in a few episodes, rather than the other characters like Ryan, it really shows. But considering that this show has a problem of using Carl way too many times, I honestly felt like that him being used in this episode isn't really that much of a big deal, considering that compared to the other episodes, what Carl did in this episode is somewhat debatable because Alexis is dealing with bullies and not a stage presentation or a speech. Especially since that Carl is taking inspiration from his favorite superhero. If you really think that I'm being over-exaggerated on the fact that these two episodes are fairly similar to each other, and when I say fairly, I mean limitedly similar to each other, keep in mind I'm trying to do different ideas that are somewhat similar to the Loudest Large versus the Launch Shot video that I made way earlier this year. In the Stella performance, one of the reasons onto why Stella is afraid of making a speech is because during her kindergarten years, or in the 1st to 4th grade of her years, she accidentally called her teacher her mommy, which was completely embarrassing to the point that she couldn't be able to do a speech ever since. And considering that this is where Stella gets her very first major role in an episode of The Loud House, it actually shows onto why she doesn't get much attention compared to the other characters. Granted, this is long overdue considering that she made her debut in 2018. But still, it kind of shows onto why that she has a disability, well, even though in one of the worst episodes where she actually agrees with the sabotaging, it kind of shows onto why that she's having a difficult time making a stand for herself. I'm not sure if this was intentional when it comes to the writing of her portrayal in other episodes, but in all honesty, I honestly felt like that what she's doing with right now by making a speech in front of so many people, it kind of sums up onto why that she may follow Lincoln's plans a little too closely when it comes to sabotaging, even though that she may disagree with him when it comes to him teaming up with Clyde against Rusty and Zach. But I'm gonna be really honest with you that the less attention to detail of Stella in the future of these episodes sums up a lot of how it's difficult to see Stella as the good person while also being somewhat of a bad person due to poor writing. Let me tell you, it really feels like that every time I look at this show and look at Stella as being one of the main characters involving Lincoln's friend group, I always see her reasonable and relatable, but most of the time emotionless due to poor writing. And considering that this happens with every single character in both shows, it's impossible to take the moral values seriously, all the while taking the character development seriously, mainly of how every time a character makes a poor decision or do something really stupid, it's really difficult to see them as characters, and mainly of how the people who are writing the episodes are portraying the characters very differently than how they were before. I understand that moral values are important, but in all honesty, in the first 3 seasons, it had a point, but as the series progressed, especially up until season 6, moral values are becoming dissolvable, mainly that it just dissolves due to the decision making after Chris Savino left. Like, if anyone's going to mention about how Chris Savino has no moral values of what he did towards the woman that he sexually assaulted, keep in mind, I don't condone what he did, but at the same time, when it comes to him working on the show, that's a completely different story. But since we're talking about moral values, in Born to be Mild, mainly Alexis being picked on by Julius and Ricky, mainly one of the characters who only appeal in this episode, while Ricky appeals with his twin brother. I'm gonna be really honest with you, the moral values in this episode would have worked if the principals were taking themselves seriously. But then again, I'm gonna get to that once I talk about the principals. When it comes to Alexis taking guidance from Carl, I'm gonna be really honest with you. If he was paired with someone else, I can guarantee you it would have been much more better, but considering that the message of this is that bullying is completely unacceptable on school grounds, which is something that the Loud House completely ignores when it comes to Lincoln being bullied by basically everyone. I'm just gonna be honest that Great Lake City's school system is just slightly dysfunctional, while in Royalwood, schools are way more dysfunctional. Like, if I'm gonna be really honest with you, that if we ever get to go to different places in this universe and have an indication or showcase that other schools are much more functional compared to this, I think that this show's way of dysfunctional schools are handling it way too literally, to the point that I'm just starting to convince that the moral values are really difficult to take them seriously, even though that the people who watch these episodes are still going to take them seriously. Believe me when I say this, that whenever I think about moral values, especially when they're hammered in, no matter what, it just doesn't usually help, and it just really makes it difficult to take the shows way more seriously, knowing full well that the people behind these shows aren't taking anything seriously. But moving on, one of the reasons onto why I don't take Carl seriously in this episode is because, again, he took inspiration from his favorite superhero, all the while that, knowing full well that he can actually try to give good advice towards Alexis, even though that most of his advices in this episode are questionable, mainly of how Alexis completely insulted Bobby to the point that it was honestly an easy target considering of how flanderized Bobby is. I have to admit that the only reason onto why Carl managed to succeed is because of him taking the easy routes rather than taking the difficult routes. Like, in the episode where he tries so hard to fake a crime scene in order to stop the crime scene, it's honestly difficult to do that with perfection. And when it comes to this, it's basically on a lower scale. Compare that to a stellar performance, I can guarantee you that Alexis would still succeed since that he doesn't have stage fright. But when it comes to taking guidance from Carl, it would have been better off if he took guidance from Ryan and her friends. Because let me tell you, in a stellar performance while Lincoln's friends are trying to help out Stella, it kind of works knowing full well that they're trying everything to help out Stella when it comes to her fear of stage fright or accidentally making a slight mistake. I can guarantee you that Stella would definitely try everything to get the support from others rather than having one person, knowing full well that Carla will probably be one of the last people to guide her. Though then again, Carla lives in Great Lake City while Stella lives in Royal Woods. Though then again, this is somewhat of an Alexis episode, considering that in episodes before and after, he never has one. And considering that this episode came out before a stellar performance, this is basically a stellar performance before a stellar performance. It may be a weird comparison, but to be honest with you, there's going to be a lot of weird comparisons that you may agree with me on, but at the same time, may think the opposite. With that being said, midway through the episodes, Zach decides to use hypnosis in order to have Stella remember her lines in order to perform better in front of so many people, while in the other episodes, Carla just turns Alexis to a bully. Mainly a rude bully to go against other bullies. You know, in the case of fighting fire with fire doesn't usually works for characters, it just really shows that if you try to fight fire with fire in this show or in the Loud House, I'm pretty sure that you would still get in trouble, but when it comes to random luck, you mostly get in trouble in 25% of the time. Mainly the fact of how it's executed, and when I stated that Lincoln instantly gets into trouble no matter what, even though that in some occasions where it's not mostly his fault and sometimes are, I honestly felt like that fighting fire with fire in this show just feels way more off, all the while that even though that when it does work, the meaning of it is honestly difficult to get into. I'm just saying, I don't think that Born to Be Mild is a bad episode by any means, but at the same time, it really feels like that the characters themselves, basically everyone, are a lot more difficult to take themselves seriously. Though then again, when the characters are trying to take the situation seriously, mainly in the Stella performance where it's revealed that the alien call was also connected to where Zach is trying to help out Stella, that as well, it somewhat makes sense considering that it's established that Zach is into aliens in the same way as his parents are. And knowing forward that the characters are trying everything to snap her out of it, despite the fact that it's gonna cost her chances on making a better speech in front of so many people. I'm going to assume that morals only work out better if the characters aren't poorly written in episodes like these. And to be perfectly honest, it kind of sums up onto why my opinions towards the two principals in these two episodes have different developments, all the while that these are one of the episodes where one of the principals have an indication onto why I don't usually take every single bit of criticism in these shows seriously. Let's get into Principal Romandinez, the principal who's responsible for sending Lincoln to Canada, which led to her getting more hate in the same fashions as Princess Bubblegum making decisions that are somewhat subverted in Adventure Time. But in this episode, it really shows that her duty as a principal sums up onto why that she is slightly better over Principal Withers from Deep Cuts. Though then again, it's not saying much knowing full well of how she is go happy most of the time, although it still questions me onto how she became principal in the first place. If I'm gonna be honest, ever since school premiered, it was difficult to sympathize Principal Romanez, knowing full well that she is incapable of making proper decisions, all the while trying to listen to characters like Lincoln closely, and whenever she's in the right, it's difficult to understand her motivations, knowing full well that afterwards, it doesn't mean anything since that she's gonna revert back to the way she was. But when it comes to this episode, it really feels like that they're trying to make her likable by not making her completely mean compared to Principal Huggins, who was the principal that Lincoln dealt with in previous seasons. And in all honesty, I think that one of the reasons onto why that people didn't like the changes in Season 5 and onwards is because the changes were really relied on way too much, but mainly for all the wrong reasons. And whenever I think about Principal Romanez in the newer seasons of The Loud House, all I can think of is that she is trying way too hard to be a good character, but at the same time, she is still a principal that's supposed to take her job as a principal seriously. Like, compared to Principal Withers, she is better, but that's saying that you're better at being less worse than the other principal. And considering that she is trying so much to give Stella the support she needs in order to make the performance in front of so many people, all the while showcasing her invention, I'm starting to convince that they're either trying to make her the total opposite of Principal Huggins, or the fact that they're just trying everything to make middle school way more wacky, but at the same time, it just strips away the down-to-earth elements that it kind of makes it really hard to see Principal Romanez as a good person whenever she does stuff like this, but at the same time, it doesn't change the fact that her sending Lincoln to Canada overshadows the good deeds that she does. Because towards the end of this episode, she told Stella about her past on being a teacher before becoming principal. It would have been a nice scene, but at the same time, I honestly felt like that if they didn't include this scene, despite the fact that it questions onto how Principal Romanez became principal, I'm starting to convince that they won't be able to make Stella fully confident after the hypnosis backfired. I'm gonna be honest, this scene is trying to be good, but at the same time, it just makes me think that Principal Romanez is honestly one of the only few people in the school industry in Roy Woods or elsewhere on trying to become principal, but only by dumb luck. Like at this point, if Roy Woods Middle School is going to keep Mr. Bohofner and his disgusting trailer outside of school, then I honestly don't know what's possible anymore. Like if all this happened in the beginning of Season 5, I can guarantee you that Yoshi player or the Lazy Broke, I'm sorry, I can't remember his newer name, but my point is that if he looked at this episode, it will probably have him raise more questions on the humanity in the Loud House. I'm starting to convince that if he ever reconsider on doing a Season 5 and maybe Season 6 ranking, even though he would never do that, he will probably have more questions circling around Principal Romanez once he gets to this episode, if he ever does. I know I've been dragging out this topic way longer than it should, but for me personally, I think it's worth discussing considering that at this point, after nearly 3 years since Scored, I really felt like I need to discuss about Principal Romanus' character, because when it comes to another project involving the Loud House and the lore itself in the near future or farther future, there was a lot to be discussed about the lore, especially since that I wouldn't be able to talk about Principal Romanus whatsoever, because I don't think I'm going to be talking about anything school related in that future video. So with that out of the way, let's go talk about the ending of Born to be Mild. Just before a brawl was about to break out in front of the school, Principal Valenzuela stops it, and just when she is about to punish the students from causing a fight, they completely talked it out, which is something that I wish it would have happened in real life, but still. Principal Valenzuela takes her job somewhat way more seriously compared to Principal Romanus, but at the same time, it doesn't change the fact that Carla tricks her in order to take over the entire school of Great Lake City. If you ask me, with that scene in mind involving Principal Valenzuela being tricked, it just goes to show that even these types of characters that aren't Principal Romanus or any of the other characters that are really unlikable are dealing with these types of developments and derailments and even finalization, and it doesn't change the fact that this is pretty much the first time where Principal Valenzuela does something physical. Granted, she did it in previous episodes, but from my knowledge, this is the episode where she actually takes further control. I mean, at this point, I would probably find her difficult to sympathize, but considering that some people may debate that even in earlier seasons where teachers and principals have disabilities and completely make poor decisions and also unlikable choices, mainly of what happens while Lincoln is going to be an outcast in the greenhouse and Mrs. Johnson is on board with it. I honestly felt like that when people look at the earlier seasons, they were looking way too much into the lore, and for me personally, I did. But as time went on, and whenever I look at these episodes and moments, all I can think of is I'm pretty sure that the down-to-earth elements have been taking it way too physical, and even though I do not condone the fantasy elements that are introduced as the series progressed, I'm starting to convince that if Alexis hugs a criminal, it would definitely work. Like, it may not involve fantasy elements, but if Alexis actually gets a superpower and it actually works by hugging someone and they change the perspective, I'm starting to convince that they're trying to make hugs as a heartwarming thing, which is something that usually does when characters like Alexis are portrayed that way, but at the same time, I'm starting to convince that anything is possible to the point that the fantasy elements are starting to become normalized. Like, granted, it's not a good way to normalize it, but after so many years since the fantasy elements have introduced, especially after watching the Loud House movie, I don't even know what to believe anymore. Believe me, I'm not sure when I'm going to be doing that Loud House lore video either this year or next year, but let me tell you, once I make that video, I'm going to discuss everything about the differences of the down-to-earth elements and the fantasy elements. What I'm saying is that Principal Valenzuela is a better principal, but at the same time, the less we know about her, it's either for the better or either for the worst. Mainly the fact that she somewhat takes her job seriously as a principal while trying to be like a principal in the same way as Principal Huggins, even though that he does have problems. But in all honesty, whenever I see every single character having flaws and those flaws just instantly becomes their disabilities in some occasions, I just don't even know who to root for anymore. And the fact that it's difficult to take these types of characters seriously. This is honestly in weird experience involving these two episodes, but for me personally, when it comes to Stella and Alexis being somewhat similar, is the fact that they have fears that they can't be able to overcome without the support from others. And when it comes to the achievements being somewhat different from each other, I have to say that Stella's achievement is mainly a lot more important, considering that she's just trying to present her invention in front of so many people while also making a speech. And when it comes to Alexis, I'm going to convince that he is just the type of person that has different qualities that he is mostly accustomed to that somewhat works out for him in the end. Though then again, Stella and Alexis will easily get along, considering that their attributes are somewhat similar, and I can instantly tell that they can instantly become friends at the end. Okay, with that out of the way, a stellar performance is the superior episode over Born to be Mild, which is why I'm giving a stellar performance an 8 out of 10, mainly high of a weighting, but at the same time, it's the closest we're ever going to get a stellar focus episode, while Born to be Mild gets a 6.5 out of 10. And when it comes to next week's Loud House vs. Casagrandes video, it's gonna be centering around mothers, considering that next week is Mother's Day.